On the 31st of March, 2002, Norfolk Island's typically calm and beautiful atmosphere was violently disrupted by a crime so uncommon and savage that its repercussions were felt across the South Pacific and beyond. The discovery of 29-year-old Janelle Patton's body marked the island's first homicide in 109 years, profoundly disturbing the tightly knit community and initiating a complex, years-long investigation that captivated both Australia and New Zealand. Janelle Patton came into the world on the 30th of June, 1972, in Sydney, Australia. She was an only child who received immense love and detailed attention from her parents. From a very tender age, Janelle developed a strong affinity for music. She was skilled in playing both the piano and clarinet, and she actively participated in her school's musical groups. After completing her secondary education, Janelle enrolled at a university to pursue medical studies. However, after just a single year, she decided to leave her program to concentrate on her professional career goals. She obtained employment at a bank, dedicating the subsequent years to steadily advancing her position. Over time, though, Janelle began to perceive that the demands and stress of urban living were adversely affecting her well-being. This prompted her to consider moving to a more tranquil setting. In October 1999, at the age of 27, Janelle made the choice to relocate to the small island of Norfolk. The island was situated nearly 1,000 miles from the Australian mainland. At that time, Norfolk had its distinct customs regulations and its own set of local laws, affording it a significant level of autonomy from the continent, though it was still officially recognized as part of Australia. With a population of around 2,000, almost everyone on Norfolk was familiar with each other. Because of its seclusion, new permanent residents were rarely seen, apart from tourists. The island was a frequently chosen destination for visitors from both Australia and New Zealand, which was geographically closer. Janelle quickly secured a job at a local hotel, became familiar with the island's inhabitants, and eventually adjusted to their unhurried way of life. Norfolk felt like a small community, but with the added isolation of being entirely surrounded by vast expanses of ocean for hundreds of miles. Consequently, the local residents consciously strove to maintain good relationships, as their social alternatives were few. Janelle had moved to Norfolk Island, seeking a fresh start. She was last seen on her morning walk before work. In late March 2002, approximately a year and a half after Janelle had relocated there, her parents finalized plans for their initial visit, which she eagerly anticipated. They arrived on the 30th of March, and Janelle dedicated the entire day to touring them around the island, introducing them to its primary attractions and the island's inhabitants. The following day, Janelle was scheduled for a morning shift at the hotel, so they arranged to meet after her work concluded. She had leased a small cottage located on a local woman's property, but it lacked sufficient space for her parents, so she booked a hotel room for them. That morning, Janelle finished her shift around 11 a.m. and commenced her regular daily walk. Her customary route involved a short circular path from her residence to a lookout point at the island's edge. Her parents expected her to arrive at their hotel around noon, but Janelle was running late. Initially, they assumed she might have been delayed by some matter, so they decided to take a walk themselves. Before their departure, they left a note for her, inserting it into the door. However, when they returned around 2:30 p.m., the note remained untouched. Realizing Janelle had not appeared as planned, her parents grew increasingly anxious. They attempted to call her, but she did not answer her phone. It was baffling how their daughter could disappear on such a compact island. The dreadful possibility that something might have befallen her began to settle in. They proceeded to her cottage and discovered the front door unlocked. However, on Norfolk, this was not considered unusual, as residents seldom locked their doors given that serious crime was virtually unknown on the island. Inside, there was no indication of Janelle's presence, and nothing suggested that any misfortune had occurred. Her car was also parked outside the premises. While they were at the house, one of Janelle's friends arrived. When they informed her that they had been unable to contact Janelle all day, she proposed they check the path Janelle typically used for her daily walk. The three of them drove along the route, but there was no sign of her. Subsequently, her parents returned to the hotel and informed the manager of the situation. He made several calls to individuals across the island, inquiring if anyone had seen Janelle, but no one had. By then, it was approximately 8 p.m., and her parents decided it was time to contact law enforcement. They explained that their daughter had been missing throughout the day, and the officers requested them to come to the station. The police notified Janelle's parents that just an hour before their call, a tourist from New Zealand had discovered a body near a narrow waterfall. She had observed a large black bag and, upon approaching it more closely, saw a human hand protruding from underneath. When officers arrived at the scene, they found a woman's body exhibiting multiple visible injuries, and parts of her clothing were missing. As Janelle's parents were speaking with the police, officers had just started the process of securing the crime scene. They immediately suspected that the victim could be Janelle. To protect her parents from the distressing task of identifying the body, investigators asked Janelle's neighbor, the woman she rented the cottage from, to come to the scene. Upon her arrival, she promptly confirmed that the victim was indeed Janelle. Her body was later discovered by tourists at Cockpit Waterfall Reserve, wrapped in a black plastic sheet. Autopsy results indicated a brutal attack, with Janelle sustaining over 60 injuries, including defensive wounds, a broken pelvis and ankle, a fractured skull, and numerous stab wounds, one of which punctured her lung and was the ultimate cause of death. The body was subsequently handed over to medical examiners, but based on initial findings, it was evident they were likely dealing with a murder case. The news sent shockwaves across the island's populace. There had been no murder on Norfolk Island since 1893, and even minor criminal offenses were uncommon. The local police were primarily accustomed to handling less serious incidents, such as arguments and domestic disputes. Now, however, they were faced with a homicide inquiry. Consequently, they opted to request assistance from Australian investigators, who promptly flew to the island. The medical examiners identified 64 separate injuries on Janelle's body, including bruises and cuts that appeared to have been inflicted by a sharp object, possibly broken glass. Supporting this theory, glass fragments were found in her hair, which investigators believed originated from a broken bottle. In addition to the cuts, bruises were present on her wrists, suggesting someone had restrained her during the attack. This led investigators to consider the possibility that more than one individual may have been involved in the murder. Alongside the glass cuts, there were also stab wounds, indicating that a knife had been used in the assault as well. Forensic experts discovered microscopic traces of green and white paint on Janelle's body. These tiny particles were also evident on her clothing and in her hair. The experts theorized that the paint might have transferred from the perpetrator or their vehicle, possibly during the disposal of her body. Although parts of Janelle's clothing were missing, which initially suggested a potential sexual motive, the forensic team found no evidence of sexual assault. However, they did recover a foreign DNA sample from her body, but it belonged to an unidentified female. The investigation was further complicated by the fact that around 3:30 p.m., on the day of the murder, a brief yet intense rainstorm swept across the island. This downpour could have washed away critical evidence such as footprints, blood, or other biological samples. Nevertheless, the rain did assist in establishing a timeline. Puddles discovered in the black plastic sheet covering Janelle's body indicated that it had been placed there before the rainfall began. This meant that Janelle had likely been deceased and at that location for at least 3 hours before she was found. While forensic experts were diligently searching for clues, the police began piecing together the final hours of Janelle's life. They found that after finishing her shift, Janelle made a stop at a store before heading home. Around the same time, her landlord arrived and observed Janelle departing for her customary walk. About 10 minutes later, another local resident drove past Janelle on the road. The next person to see her resided near the end of that route and observed Janelle standing beside a white car, engaged in conversation with the driver. According to the witness, she thought there were 2 men in the car, though she admitted it was possible there could have been only one. 5 minutes later, 2 additional witnesses who resided close to the road reported hearing what sounded like a child crying in the distance. Another man stated he heard a scream, but by the time he went outside to investigate, the noise had ceased. Based on this information, the police concluded that the attack on Janelle likely occurred around 11:45 a.m., merely 30 minutes after she had finished her work. With no strong leads, the police sent the black plastic sheet that Janelle's body had been wrapped into the mainland for more advanced testing. After some time, the results were returned. Forensic experts had identified 10 distinct fingerprints on the sheet, but each one was partially blurred. Despite this challenge, the detectives opted to attempt matching the prints. They compiled a list of everyone who had been on the island on the day of the murder, totaling over 2,700 names, including both residents and visitors. The police requested all individuals between the ages of 15 and 70 to voluntarily provide their fingerprints and DNA samples, but only half of them complied. Out of 1,300 sets of fingerprints, the experts were unable to find a single match. With no results from the prints, the investigators decided to shift their focus to potential suspects among Janelle's acquaintances. Her diary proved to be a key source of information. It contained detailed entries about life on the island and her relationships with its residents. From the diary, police learned that Janelle had a strained relationship with one of her friends. When Janelle first moved to the island, this woman helped her find a temporary place to live at her friend's house. However, Janelle didn't stay there long, apparently due to some disagreements. But even after Janelle moved out, this man continued to act suspiciously. Several witnesses reported that he had once threatened Janelle in the middle of the street. Police also discovered that after her body was found, he asked a friend to provide him with an alibi and say that they spent the day together, even though it wasn't true. The reason behind his behavior remained unclear, but the police uncovered an interesting detail. It appeared that he was in a secret relationship with Janelle's friend, the one who had helped her with housing. Despite the fact that the woman was married with children, Janelle had written about their affair in her diary, and it was possible that the couple wasn't happy she knew about their secret. Despite this, both the man and the woman provided their fingerprints, and neither matched those found on the plastic sheet. The police also searched their homes and cars, but found no incriminating evidence. The next suspect the police looked into was a man Janelle had been dating for 9 months. He too was investigated for possible involvement, but once again, the police couldn't find any evidence linking him to the crime. Janelle's diary also mentioned several other people with whom she had tense relationships, but all of them agreed to provide their fingerprints and DNA samples, and none of them matched. At one point, the police even considered Janelle's parents as suspects, since the murder occurred the day after they arrived on the island. But this theory also led nowhere. Eventually, the investigation reached a standstill. For several months, the police attempted to identify new suspects and re-examine existing evidence, but every lead ultimately led to a dead end. They even announced a substantial reward of $300,000 for information regarding the case, but none of the tips brought them any closer to identifying the perpetrator. 2 years later, investigators reopened the case and decided to review the fingerprint samples they had previously collected from locals and tourists. This time, they also included prints from suspects involved in other recent cases on the island. Since all the prints were stored on paper, experts were required to compare them manually. The process took a considerable amount of time, but eventually detectives received a breakthrough call. The fingerprints of a suspect from another case matched 2 prints found on the black tarp used to wrap Janelle's body. That suspect was 26-year-old Glenn McNeil. McNeil's apprehension occurred in February 2006. Shortly after Janelle's murder, law enforcement had questioned him regarding a home invasion, but he was not arrested. Nevertheless, his fingerprints had been collected and maintained within the case file since then. Police also discovered that in 2002, McNeil owned a white Honda, which aligned with the description of a vehicle a witness saw near Janelle just moments before her death. Another noteworthy aspect was that McNeil had departed the island soon after the murder took place. He had relocated to Norfolk from New Zealand in 2000 with his wife and worked as a chef, but they subsequently divorced, a situation that also coincided with his move from the island. At the time of the investigation, McNeil was residing in New Zealand with his new wife and 2 children, which presented difficulties for the police in conducting an interview with him. However, they deduced that he had likely not transported his car off the island, so they opted to search for it, hoping forensic experts could examine it for evidence. Before long, they located it. The white Honda had been abandoned on someone's property, not far from his previous residence, and was heavily overgrown with weeds. It was transferred to forensic specialists, and investigators secured a warrant to search the house where McNeil had lived during his time on the island. When the experts thoroughly examined the car, they found traces of white and green paint that were consistent with the paint particles found on Janelle's body. There were also a few glass fragments, and similar shards were found in his former home. An expert was brought in to analyze the samples, and he confirmed that the glass shards from the car, the house, and those found on Janelle's clothes and body not only matched, but were manufactured at the same time for a specific type of product. He also identified parts of an engraving on one of the shards, which turned out to be the name of a wine, confirming that all three sets of glass fragments originated from the same wine bottle. In the backyard of McNeil's former house, the police discovered a black tarp that was identical to the one used to wrap Janelle's body. They also found several human hairs and some biological traces in the trunk of his car. But unfortunately, both pieces of evidence had deteriorated over time, making it impossible for experts to extract any DNA. Undeterred, detectives sent the hairs to a laboratory in the U.S., which possessed the most advanced technology at the time, but the process extended for a year. The first lab was overloaded and unable to process them immediately. Ultimately, one of the detectives had to fly to the U.S. to personally deliver the samples to a different lab. Finally, in early 2006, the police obtained the crucial result they were seeking. The hairs were confirmed to belong to Janelle. With all this evidence coming together, detectives secured an arrest warrant and headed to New Zealand to take McNeil into custody. He was then extradited to Australia, where he was officially charged with Janelle's murder. During the first interrogation, McNeil, to the surprise of the detectives, started confessing right away. He claimed that on the morning of the murder, he smoked some weed and went for a drive around the island. At some point, he bent down to grab a pack of cigarettes, lost sight of the road, and hit something. At first, McNeil thought he'd run over an animal, but when he got out of the car, he saw a person lying underneath it. Panicking, he loaded the body into his trunk and drove home, where he spent hours using drugs. A while later, he started hearing noises coming from the trunk and realized the woman was still alive. That's when he grabbed a kitchen knife, opened the trunk, and stabbed her multiple times. After that, McNeil wrapped the body in a tarp and dumped it near the waterfall. Despite his confession, detectives knew immediately he was lying. Almost every statement he made did not align with the facts. Medical examiners were certain that Janelle's injuries were inconsistent with being struck by a car. Furthermore, McNeil's narrative failed to account for the bruises on her wrist, the cuts caused by glass shards, and why part of her clothing had been removed. And if he had indeed stabbed her in the trunk, there would have been blood traces there, which the forensic team surely would not have overlooked, but none were found. The police attempted to persuade him to tell the truth, highlighting all the inconsistencies, but McNeil stubbornly adhered to his version of events. In the end, the case proceeded to trial, which began in the summer of 2006. It was conducted on the island, and the jury was selected from among the local residents. At the first hearing, McNeil asserted he had no involvement in the murder and even stated he had no recollection of providing any confession to the police. He attributed his memory lapse to alleged mental health issues, though there was no medical documentation to support his claims. However, by the time the trial commenced, the detectives had uncovered something significant. They were aware that McNeil's defense team would emphasize the fact that female DNA was found on Janelle's body. It wasn't just on her clothes, but also under her fingernails, which suggested she might have scratched a woman in a struggle before she died. This raised the possibility that a woman was involved in the murder and could have jeopardized the entire case. After McNeil's arrest, the investigators questioned everyone who knew Janelle, inquiring if there was any connection between her and McNeil. One of her friends recalled something distinct. Only 2 or 3 weeks before Janelle's death, she had asked her friend if she was familiar with a woman named Alicia and her husband, Glenn McNeil. The friend replied that she did not know them personally, but had observed them in the vicinity. Janelle provided no reason for her inquiry and simply changed the subject. This same friend also mentioned that on the day of the murder, while working at a hotel, she noticed Alicia outside acting in an unusual manner. Alicia was covered in something red, and when the friend asked if everything was acceptable, Alicia, appearing somewhat agitated, merely stated it was just paint and then walked away. For some reason, the witness did not consider informing the police about this at the time. She did not realize it could be linked to Janelle's murder until detectives questioned her specifically about McNeil and his wife. Alicia was called upon to provide testimony in court, but maintained her innocence concerning the murder. It remains unclear whether the police compared her DNA with the female sample recovered from Janelle's body. Interestingly, later, Janelle's friend changed her testimony, alleging that a religious cult composed of 6 individuals was responsible for her murder. This revelation greatly astonished investigators, leading to doubts about all her prior statements. As for McNeil, he persisted in denying any involvement in the murder, still claiming no memory of having confessed. Despite his assertions, given all the presented evidence, the jury found him culpable on the 9th of March, 2007. He received a prison sentence of 24 years. Even though the case appeared to be resolved, numerous individuals continued to doubt whether McNeil was indeed the sole perpetrator. The most prevalent theory, based on witness accounts and the nature of the victim's injuries, suggested he might not have acted alone. Either he murdered Janelle with an accomplice, or assisted someone else in disposing of her body. Several years after the trial, McNeil abruptly declared he knew the true killer of Janelle. According to his revised account, the culprit was a man who had been supplying him with drugs. McNeil stated that on the morning of the murder, he was at home when this man and his wife arrived. The man informed him there was a body in his trunk and ordered McNeil to dispose of it, threatening to harm him and his wife if he refused. Frightened for his life, McNeil complied with the directive. He transferred the body into his own car, wrapped it in a tarp, and transported it to the waterfall. He also claimed he wore medical gloves during this process, but detectives swiftly pointed out a contradiction in his story. Several of his fingerprints were found on the tarp, which would not have been there if he had used gloves. Additionally, he asserted he had buried the gloves in his yard, but when police excavated the area, they found nothing. McNeil also named the man he claimed killed Janelle, and this individual was indeed suspected of distributing illicit substances. When police examined McNeil's phone records, they discovered he had been in regular contact with him. However, this only indicated that McNeil was purchasing drugs from him, not that the man was involved in the murder. In the subsequent years, several additional theories regarding this case emerged, each one more questionable and inconsistent than the last. Some media outlets even suggested that Janelle was a confidential police informant, proposing that this could have been the actual motive for her murder, but no concrete evidence was ever discovered to support this theory or any of the others. McNeil gained an early release from incarceration on the 1st of February, 2024, and was subsequently sent back to New Zealand. While he will continue to be monitored under probationary terms, he is, by definition, no longer confined. Across all these years, McNeil has consistently maintained his account that others were culpable for the homicide. Perhaps at some future point, he might alter his narrative once more, and then the real facts will finally come to light. But until that happens, this particular case continues to be fraught with unresolved inquiries.